Hello, hello. You are watching the life-changing power of sexual healing, your invitation and opportunity to move beyond your past and claim the intimacy, pleasure, and expansion that you are seeking. I'm Anahita Joon, your host, and I'm so excited to be sitting here today with Dr. Alison, who is a sex and intimacy coach and sexual empowerment educator. She's been exploring the intricacies of sex and gender for more than a decade. She is also a champion for others overcoming shame, deepening pleasure. Dr. Ash helps many clients radically explore and courageously express themselves. You can find her on turnon.love. You can also read a little bit more about her on this page. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. I'm excited to dive in. So I just want to dive in right to your story as to where, at what point in your life's journey you feel like you really got aware that you were a sexual being or awakened to that piece, and then whatever the relationship to it was.
I feel like I've been a sexual being for actually as long as I can remember. My earliest memory is me self-pleasuring myself on my car seat belt. And I remember as a kid, one of my fears was dying a virgin. It wasn't that I wanted to have sex. It was something I actually really wanted to wait for, but I didn't want to die before I had it. Like, I knew that it would be a profound experience for me.
Okay. And then, so how did that go into your development? So actually, I want to say this, the thing you said about the car seat is we were actually, this came up in one of the sessions I was recording yesterday, was around erotic innocence. And, when the shame really falls away and we're able to be as free as we are when we're children, and in the exploration and the permission and relationship to our bodies. So I love that that's coming back up again.
Yeah.
And then, so how long did that last? Like that innocence, that curiosity, and then what happened as you developed?
Well, I grew up in Chicago, and I lived in the city on a busy street. And so I have many memories of being catcalled when I was actually too young to really understand what that was about. And experiences of feeling valued for my body or for my sexuality, even when I was just, as you mentioned, really innocent and not putting myself out there in a sexual way. And I remember when I got my period, my mother took me to Victoria's Secret and bought me my first fancy bra, and going to school and being shamed for wearing a padded bra and for being flat-chested and not having big breasts. And
How old were you then?
8th grade.
Okay. Oh, that's brutal. 8th grade is hard grade.
Yeah, it was really tough. It was very, very tough. Actually, I think it was 7th grade, but either way, very, very challenging to feel like, this desire to want to start to embrace my womanhood and my sense of sexual autonomy, and then feeling like I was scrutinized and made to feel ashamed for performing sexuality in a way that wasn't what others deemed appropriate or even desirable.
Yeah. So how did that affect your relationship with your own sexuality then?
Well, I remember coming back 8th grade year wearing very baggy clothes and just kind of hiding my body and actually finding an easier time at school. And then it wasn't until I lost my virginity at 16 with my boyfriend on our 1-year anniversary. It was a very special experience and something that I really waited for. And I remember that my father had given me, he was about to give me the talk. And I cut him off and I was like, Dad, I know about birth control. I know about condoms. I know what safe sex is. And he goes, that's not what I was going to say. And he said, I want you to know that you can only lose your virginity once. And I want it to be really special and memorable for you. And that was a profound experience for me to have my dad celebrate myself as a sexual person and to celebrate my pleasure and to want me to honor it for myself. And I think that was definitely part of the reason that I was so intentional about having sex for the first time. And it was a magical experience. And I was very sexual from the first time. I think we had sex 15 times in that weekend. We were just little
Oh
animals.
my God. That is on the rarer side of what I
It
hear.
is. It is. And I think that that's what happens when we tell women that they have a right to say yes to the things that they want to say yes to. It makes it so much easier to say no to the things that we are a no to, and to save ourselves for those really powerful experiences that we are a full, complete yes to. And I don't think he really realized how, I wonder if he really realized how impactful it was to just not say, don't do it, or be careful, it's dangerous, but to say it can be really special and I want you to honor it.
Yeah, that's really, really profound, because it's more often than not, and it was certainly my experience, and so many people that I talk to and work with, is this lack of the father knowing how to mirror and be in relationship with the budding sexuality of a daughter, that it's just like, it's not happening. It's either like, it's not happening or lock it down. Those
Mm-hmm.
are the primary experiences that most of the women that I talk to around the world have had. So for you to have had this experience, I mean, let's just have, I just want to say, like, if you're watching this and you have children and you have a partner who, or even you co-parent with someone, a daughter, share this with them, because of the impact that it can have, because there's so much we have to undo down the road when that mirroring doesn't happen. And so what an incredible blessing for you at such a young age.
It really was, especially because my next sexual experience was being assaulted. And I'm
Mm,
so grateful that I had this positive imprinting of
right.
what sex could be like and feel like,
Yeah.
and that I knew when I was assaulted how far from that it was. It helped. I mean, I still felt so much shame, and this was before rape culture was rape culture. This is before we
Yeah.
talked about blaming the victim and secondary victimization, and that it doesn't matter what you wear, how much you drink. There's nothing that you can do that makes it okay. And so I did feel a lot of shame, and yet there was a small part of me that also knew that it could be so different. And I'm really glad for that seed that was planted.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you had the assault experience?
It was later that year, so I was still 16.
Okay.
It was my first time being drunk at a party,
Uh,
and I was assaulted by two 23-year-old men. And there was something for me about that experience that it wasn't until I was 23 and realized how disgusting it would be to sleep with a 16-year-old,
right.
that I fully forgave myself, and that I fully let go of the feeling of it's my fault, or I contributed to it, or I shouldn't have gotten drunk, or I shouldn't have done this, or shouldn't have done that. And just to have this bottom line of that wasn't okay, and that wasn't my fault.
Yeah. When you say assault, like, what happened?
Well, I was drunk, and I have some kind of fuzzy memories of the first man having sex with me. Um,
Okay.
and then I don't remember the second man raping me, but I do remember afterwards saying, I'm not angry, I just want to know if you used a condom. And I remember saying that because I just wanted him to tell me the truth. I wanted
Right.
to know. I, of course, was quite angry, but I was afraid, and I just wanted to put the pieces together and have some understanding of what had happened.
Wow. Okay. So it was rape. Sometimes, it's the assault is kind of like, so what happened? I'm sorry that happened to you. And what happened after that? Like, what was your relationship with your body, with men, with sex?
Well, I went to a very small high school, and it got out, but what got out in my school was that I slept with two men. Because
Mm.
again, remember, this is before rape culture. So this is
Right.
before anybody participated in the discussion in a way that could have been supportive or de-shamifying of my experience.
Yeah.
So I became the slut of my school. And I have to say that in so many ways, and perhaps because I don't recall the actual rape very well, the year of slut shaming that I experienced afterwards was far more traumatic for me. Being I remember once getting in a fight with somebody and them saying, well, at least I didn't sleep with 2 guys in one night. Like, just was like this like card that anybody could pull on at any point to tear me down. And it did. It really impacted me in some painful ways. And I think that the protective strategy that I adopted was to not want to be that girl, the kind of girl in my mind that needed emotional connection, that needed to have needs really in general, and one that was sexually empowered by having the kinds of experiences that I wanted, when I wanted, with whom I wanted, and to be able to honor my sexuality without shaming it. And I think what I did is I went to the other end of the spectrum. Right. And I kind of disregarded the parts of me that were tender and that needed to be loved and needed to be held. And instead just really embraced this fierce, feminist part of me that said, I can do whatever experiences I want with whomever I want, and nobody can say anything about it and shame me for it. And in some ways that was a powerful step in my journey, to be able to claim my sexuality and to not let other people shame me for it.
Yeah, taking that back.
Reclaiming it for myself. Yes. And then of course, as I'm sure you can imagine, the next step of the journey was reclaiming my heart.
Yeah. So what do you mean? So what was the step where you had not reclaimed your heart? So you're sexually empowered. You said you swung to the other side of the pendulum. So what does that look like?
It looked like for me being able to have sex without being emotionally connected and enjoying it for the sake of pleasure rather than for the intimacy that it could provide. Focusing on figuring out what I wanted and asking for it, because that made me feel really sexually powerful without being emotionally vulnerable. And not even asking for, but even acknowledging for myself the ways that I wanted to be loved and valued and appreciated for more than just my body and the pleasure that it could produce.
So how long did it take you, or what did it take to realize that, like my heart is kind of missing something, or I'm lonely, or this is not quite as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be?
I was in a very long-term relationship at the end of college that kind of spanned into grad school, and it wasn't the most sexual relationships, and there certainly wasn't a lot of pleasure, but there was a lot of intimacy. And so here I had this experience of feeling intimacy, but not having it be connected with pleasure. I was the more sexual one in the relationship. I often was making advances and being turned down. And what happened was I kind of turned off my sexual dial, because I think that when we don't get to have that parts of ourselves expressed and celebrated, we just kind of allow it to deaden inside and to become cold. And so then after we broke up, I kind of swung to the other end of the pendulum again and had all these hot, really fun sexual experiences. And one of the things that I did was, I've always viewed my sexuality as a vehicle for growth and self-discovery. And I had realized that I'd never been in a healthy relationship. My ex and I had had a lot of intimacy issues and some codependency stuff that had come up for us. And I also realized I never had healthy relationships modeled for me. So what I did was I decided I was going to date couples that I really admired and appreciated. I was also coming to terms with my own queer identity and wanting to have more experiences with women. And so I was dating these fabulous, amazing couples. And I have to say that when you see somebody, physically naked, you get to be really emotionally naked with them as well. At least it has the opportunity. And it did for me with these couples, and to get to see how they...
So let me ask you something, because I know this is, how would one even know how to date couples?
Yeah. Well, I have to say this is one of the advantages of living in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a very sexually progressive place, and there is a very strong non-monogamous culture here. And I started to just meet people that were about a decade older than me. I was in my early to mid 20s at this point. And and just asking questions and putting myself out there. And, as I said, I've always been, or at least one of my steps in the earlier part of my journey was figuring out what I want and asking for it. So I was very upfront about, I'm exploring relationships. I'm exploring what kind of relationship I want to be in. I'm intentionally single right now, but I'd really like to have some intimacy and to explore and to get to see what your relationship is like and how you are with one another. And yeah, so I had maybe 2 or 3 couples that I had some powerful experiences with. And
wow. Was that ongoing experiences, like being in relationship with like a couple?
they weren't like, I mean, a little bit. I had some repeated experiences with some other couples, but it wasn't like we were a triad and I was like in their relationship with them. It was
Right.
more like we were friends, and sometimes we would go on dates and have, these experiences together. And I have this memory, this one time I was hooking up with this couple, and it's pretty PG, like, we were just like in the makeout, feeling and touching stage. And the guy in the couple leaned over and nibbled on my cheek. And I remember like closing my eyes and leaning into it, and his partner got really triggered. There was something about the intimacy of that moment that was really hard for her to witness.
Yeah.
And he showed up so powerfully for her, held space, like exquisitely held space for her emotional experience, and validated it and de-shamified it, and showed her with his words and his touch how much he cared for her and how much he loved for her. And I just cracked. Like I started bawling, and I mean sobbing, and it was this moment of me realizing that's what I want. That's what my heart at its core is longing for. It's not just pleasure and exploration and empowerment in the way of asking for what I want and getting for it. It's actually like this much deeper, more vulnerable place of being cared for and loved, accepted for all that she was. Because I mean, he so easily could have shamed her. I just bit her cheek. That's no big deal. What are you upset about?
Right.
There was none of that.
Yeah. Well, and that's amazing. And it's obviously like so required to have had all of those. Like when you say that, what I hear is like how many boundary conversations they must have had to then be able to open their relationship up.
Yeah.
And how much of that is required to be so clear. And that's probably why he knew, like, oh,
It wasn't their first experience with it.
Right.
They definitely had invested a lot of time and energy in solidifying the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's just an incredible moment to share. So you realize this is what I want. And then what?
Well, I realized I wanted to open up my heart, but that was really challenging. Like, I think that when you spend a long time guarding this part of yourself without even fully realizing that that's what you're doing, making the decision that you want to open yourself up is the first step, but learning how to do so wasn't easy for me. And as I mentioned, I didn't really have a lot of healthy relationships modeled for me. I didn't have healthy intimacy modeled for me. And so I dove deep into self-growth and transformational work and figuring out how to identify emotions in my body. What are the emotions? How to feel all the way through them, getting to share them, being really vulnerable about what I'm feeling, figuring out what I needed in those moments of feeling intense emotions and having to ask for it. Developing self-care practices, but also learning how to regulate my nervous system with someone else and allow someone else to soothe me and to be let in. And I think that actually, it was a long process, several years of me learning how to do this. And the moment that was probably kind of sealed the deal for me was, so I had this cat. I'm a cat person. and he and I were like this. I mean, I had him for 11 years through all my transitions and all my changes. And I came home one night and he meowed and fell over and died. Like no warning, nothing. And I was devastated. I mean, like destroyed, utterly destroyed. I mean, there was like the whole existential angst of like realizing impermanence and death and dying and being with somebody that was dead. But there was also like this loss of my most secure attachment figure I had ever had. I mean, the snuggle bunny that slept with me every night. And I was dating this man. We had slept together once before this happened, so it was super new and fresh. And he came over the day after Gus died, and I had 3 literal boxes of snot rags all over my room. I mean, it was just covered in the messiest tissues, and my face was red and splotchy, and I was wearing pajamas, and my hair was like this. Like, nothing of me was presented or put together. And I went to the bathroom, and I came back, and he had all the tissues in his arm, and he was like, "Where's your garbage can?" And it was just so representative of how he was with me for the next few months, like just willing to be with me when I was completely raw and emotionally naked and just messy. I mean, the messiest that I'd ever been. And held me while I would sob. I mean, I remember this one time I had this like big snot puddle on his shoulder from just sobbing in his arms for so long and feeling embarrassed and ashamed about it. And he's like, "That's okay. That's what laundry's for." Like, just really loving me in this state. And I think that that was the first time that I didn't have a choice about how vulnerable I was going to be. I had no other choice. And to be loved in that was a life-changing experience.
Yeah. Well, I love like what you're sharing is, you know, just that piece where I think so many of us think that we have to somehow like keep it all together in order to be loved or lovable. Like, you know, this like me being smart and accomplished and successful and charming and beautiful and well-dressed and witty and funny and all of like, those are all the things that make me lovable, right? And worthy. And then I love it because it's definitely a theme that's come up in other sessions where, you know, there's enough grief where the dam just breaks and you can't hold it all together.
And to be celebrated for my emotional capacity. I mean, that's one of the things he loved, is how deeply I felt and how willing I was to be vulnerable in it.
Wow. Yeah. I'm curious though, before this incident with him, like you said, you kind of started like really diving deeply and studying and you know, self-care and like, how can I take the guards off my heart? What was dating like in that process? I kind of want to know like the misses, like where did you miss?
Well, I was intentionally single still for a while after that realization that I had with the couple, because I knew what I wanted, but I didn't know how to get there. And there was a safety in being proudly single. Like, this is a choice I'm making. I'm not single because I can't find anybody. I'm single because I want to be single.
Right. Well, in your 20s, that like feels like, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then realizing, hey, I actually don't want to be single.
Right.
Right. And I remember dating someone and him blowing me off and bailing on dates and coming over late night for the booty calls. And I remember telling him off and saying, like, I don't just want to be a booty call to you. And I know that you're saying that I'm not, but you're treating me like I am. And that doesn't feel good to me. And I'm not interested in participating in this anymore. And that was a really powerful experience, because he was, you know, a very good lover, and it was really nice to have somebody to share that kind of sexual intimacy with. But acknowledging for myself the ways that it actually was not nourishing for me to not have it be accompanied with emotional intimacy, and to not feel valued for more than my body. And just how familiar it was, how easy it was to slide back into that, but how ultimately unsatisfying it was for me.
Yeah, it's funny, as you said that, I had a flash to something I haven't even thought about for a long time, which is this poor guy. He was like this beautiful guy. I was 22. And all of my friends had crushes on him, and he was so beautiful, and all the girls wanted him except for me, because he wasn't smart enough. Like he just was not conscious. He wasn't smart. He wasn't awake. So I would show up played at his house, and he was like so smitten with me. So when you said that, I had like that flash of like how I would show up at his house at 1 a.m, to make out or just snuggle. And then I would get up and leave at 4. And he was always like, where are you going? Like, can I take you to dinner? I was like, no. And, just how incredibly guarded I was at the time was like definitely like, and it was such a power trip.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely like, it's like everybody wants him and I don't even want him, but he was cute and great arms and great snuggler. So it's funny. I haven't thought about that for a really long time. So you have this experience with this man who shows up and embraces your emotionality and is present with you and creates another shift. Actually, I want to know what was the sex like with him?
Sweet and tender. And, I am a kinky person, and there was a whole aspect of my sexual explorations that weren't met in this relationship. And yet, it was so beautiful to allow the slow, the sweet, the sensual, the loving to be enough to fill me up. Mm-hmm. Though when we broke up, I definitely, went back to exploring my sexual kinks and finding, the new edges for me to uncover and explore. But what I realized in that relationship with this beautiful man was, I knew how good the hard felt. I knew how much I craved intensity. Mm-hmm. But what I learned in my relationship with him was how much the other end of the spectrum is really beautiful and yummy as well. Mm-hmm. And that it's actually diversity of sensation and intensity that is really erotic for me. Mm-hmm. And it was being so in love with someone who really wanted slow, sweet sex that I got to develop an appreciation for that as well.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. Kink has come up a couple of times, but it's like there isn't real discussion of like what anybody considers kinky. So what is that to you?
Yeah.
Like what practices, what acts, what's the edge? And then to other people, because I know you work with people in this realm as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would actually say that my kinkiness relates to my queer identity in some ways, because for me, being queer is not just being attracted to women and trans people. For me, being queer is all the ways that I'm non-normative in my experience of my gender expression, my experience of of who turns me on, my sexuality, my sexual orientation. It's also my sexual preferences and the kinds of sex that I find really hot. So I also include in my queerness the fact that I'm non-monogamous and that I prefer non-monogamous dynamics, ethically, of course. And also I would say that part of my kink is exploring group sex and play parties. It's been exploring power dynamics and some aspects of BDSM. It's been exploring role playing and all the things that can offer. Just really trying to figure out what is it that turns me on, having everything be on the table as an option and getting to decide it, try it out, maybe try it out twice, see if I like it or not, being totally okay with not liking things. But in that, remember, by celebrating my no, welcoming my yes, and not having what society dictates as normal define my normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to someone who might be in a partnership with someone who would prefer sweet and soft sex? And maybe they have set aside their kinky side. Maybe they're sort of, I don't know, maybe they have a secret life, even if it's just a fantasy life. Mm-hmm. What would you say around how to include a partner, how to bring a partner into that aspect of desire?
Well, I think being open and honest and transparent is really important. Sometimes people aren't interested in certain things because they haven't tried it, or they're not interested in certain things because they think that somehow they're not going to be good at it, or that they're going to be shamed for it, or they haven't even considered it, right? So sharing what it is that you're interested in. I always talk about finding your Venn diagram of shared yeses. Like, this is what I'm into, this is what you're into, where do we overlap? Right. And getting to play there. And also being willing to be with each other in the disappointment of realizing that no relationship is going to meet all of your needs. It's just not possible. Disappointment is inevitable and unavoidable. And that actually the most profound thing that we can do when we feel disappointed is to share it and to stay in connection and be with each other in the disappointment and allow it to build and deepen intimacy. One of the many reasons that I like exploring conscious non-monogamy is because that takes the pressure off of any one of my partners to be everything and to have to fulfill all of my needs. And so, you know, at the time I was dating this man that I was referring to, we were monogamous. And it might have been one of the things that contributed to us breaking up was that we did have these very different sets of needs of what we wanted. And I think that, you know, if your needs aren't going to get met in a relationship, I see that you have 5 options, right? You can stay and build resentment. Many of us do that. We can leave. We can outsource dishonestly. We can outsource honestly. Or we can stay and be with the disappointment and build intimacy. And I think that I've done all of those things, well, except for outsourcing dishonestly, but no shame there if people have. And I think that for me, it was this process of learning what are the things that I want to do, what are the options that I have at my disposal, and kind of exploring them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. And in that same light, if someone is watching and they haven't let themselves even explore their own kink, you know, I think there seems to be definitely a lot more that gets explored in the mind than, you know, in the physical world, whether it's like the geography or of where we live, like if it's not San Francisco or New York or, you know, I live in Boulder, there's a pretty big poly community and like very open here. But if someone is finding themselves living where that's not really an option, so they haven't even let themselves go there, what would you say around how to even like discover what you really would be into?
Well, I mean, I think that unfortunately we're flooded with a lot of really crappy porn these days, right? Like there is great feminist porn out there where pleasure is at the forefront and the actors get to decide who and what and where and how. And I have no issues with porn. I find some of it really, really enjoyable. I don't think that it's the best form of sex education. And unfortunately, it's what so many people have to rely on because it's what's easily accessible. And so I would say that be really persistent in your exploration of porn and try and find porn that has you feel good and excited and inspired and turned on in ways more than just the instant gratification. Using it as creative potential for you to build your fantasies. Also, there's a lot of amazing erotic literature. Yeah. They have some amazing websites that just share erotic literature. Amateurs can post their short stories, stuff like that.
Beautiful. Can you actually tell us? Because I feel like when you're saying like, you know, explore the porn, not for instant gratification, but for inspiration and for, you know, creative spark. I feel like, God, there's so much junk to get through.
There is.
So like, what are some resources for feminist porn? And what are some places to read some erotica that, you know, can...
Crash Pad is a great website for feminist porn. I'm just going to switch to my internet for a quick second.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a website called Literotica, Literotica. There's a lot of good literature on there. If you want to explore some good kink, I think the Marketplace series is some really heavy BDSM books that I found really hot. I also really liked the Sleeping Beauty trilogy. Anne Rice wrote it, and originally she wrote it under a pen name, but she's republished it under her name, and I found that to be really hot. And so reading was really powerful for me, because what that did was it gave me a lot of fodder, but it also encouraged my mind to create the visualizations and to build upon it. And there's also some really good podcasts these days that have good erotica on it. The Sexy Librarian podcast is one of them. And that also, so I mean, if some people are more auditory, some are more visual, some like to read, like explore all these different avenues. And also there's some really good short stories out there, books of compilations of short stories. I can't think of the title right now, but that's also powerful, because then you can just read little bits of lots of things. And I always try and say, like, you are allowed to think whatever you want in your mind. Like, you have total freedom to fantasize about whatever you want to fantasize about, and to run with it.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing those resources. I feel like it's really important. Just on the journey of discovery and giving ourselves permission to kind of like, what do I want? And what if there's more that I want? And what is that? So I just want to know as well, like, what would you say is the gift and the expansion that's possible when, someone might go from, let's say, being on a scale of 1 to 10, being a 5 on the connection to their sexuality and their desire and their pleasure, to when they're like a 9 or a 10. How do you see that impacting life, intimacy, prosperity, purpose, like all of these things?
Yeah, great question. Well, the things that we learn in sex and intimacy relationships are so applicable to every area of our lives. When we learn how to say and hear no and stay in connection, when we learn how to discover our boundaries and express them and uphold them, when we learn how to figure out what we want and advocate for it, and how to empower others to figure out what they want and advocate for their desires. All these experiences translate to greater success at the workplace, with our family, with our housemates, even with our children. Learning how to do repair work in intimacy and relationships helps us be better parents. Like, there's all these really powerful ways that the skills that we can learn in relationships, sexual relationships, translate to every area of our life. That's one of the reasons that I get so frustrated that we're not taught this stuff. We're not taught it at school. Most families don't teach it, yet we're expected to know it. And not knowing it is so costly.
Yeah.
It's really powerful to be alive in this day and age where there are so many great sex and intimacy coaches and therapists and educators out there. There's a lot of virtual stuff that's available. And so I really want to encourage people to take advantage and learn these skills, because not only are you going to have more intimacy and better sex and feel more in integrity with yourself and your desire and your body, you'll also find yourself more empowered in all these other areas of your life.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of education missing from the overculture educational system. So it's kind of up to us to seek it out and educate our partners, ourselves, our children, and our friends. I feel like that's such a fun part. Like, what comes to mind is just like how much fun my girlfriends and I and my mother and I have had watching the Magic Mike movies. Like, just like, please, let's gather and let's watch. And so just like the sharing of the freedom is and the celebration of having permission to have desires and experience lust and anything is I feel like so healing within all the relationships.
That's right. The very first workshop I ever taught is called How to Be a Feminist in the Bedroom. And I created it because I had so many friends that wanted to talk about how to be a feminist in the bedroom and how to figure out how to say no and discover what they want and advocate for themselves. And it was such a joy to get to teach it, not only because I love teaching, but to get to interact with my peers in this way where I could see it shifting their dynamics and the conversations that they were having. I think that has actually been the final step, or one of the final steps in my sexual empowerment journey. Of course, it's never over. I realize that taking all of my core wounds and all of the challenges and struggles that I've experienced and allowing it to become this gift that I can offer to others has been so healing for me.
Indeed it is. When we're on that path as a teacher or healer, it's like just when you get to do that. Alison, I so appreciate you I so appreciate you being here with us and sharing your journey and your wisdom and just having this candid behind the curtain conversation. I think it's really important that we get to see what each other's journeys look like, and certainly appreciate your knowledge as an expert in your field as well.
Thank you. It's been so fun talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you have a beautiful gift for this community that I actually think everyone should grab. Will you tell us what it is?
Sure. I have a 4-step guide to deepening intimacy and pleasure. And what it is it's a series of PDFs that talk about how to navigate consent, how to discover your boundaries, to explore what are your emotional triggers and how to engage in self-care, and a guide to my pussy or pussy, which is a wonderful Mad Libs kind of document where you get to explore what it is that feels good for you and how to talk about it with your partners.
So good. I'm going to grab it. I encourage everyone to grab it. There's always so much more to learn and just to get comfortable and being in this dialogue with ourselves and our loved ones, and keep being empowered. So thanks again, Alison.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate sharing this journey of freedom and permission and expression and pleasure and eroticism and all those yummy things with you. So thanks for tuning in, and see you soon. Love and blessings.
Bye-bye.